In this video, we're going to talk about the fairy tale, The Little Men in the Woods, by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Fairy tales are a delight, and they're fun, humorous, but they also have this deeper underlying meaning to them, which can be very enjoyable for both adults and children to listen to. I want to say here that, however, that children under the age of 14 should be just allowed to hear the story rather than an interpretation of it like this. I hesitate to even share these interpretations, but I think they are helpful for adults and parents to see the real value in telling these stories and at what ages and for what purposes to tell them. One of the purposes that are used in this story is that teachers use often is to teach the number 3 to their first graders of ages 7 or 8 years old. And the reason why that is helpful is because in this story, it really develops the quality of that number, which I'll go into quite a bit as I go in more depth of this interpretation. But beyond just teaching the number, it also has a much deeper pedagogical value to the story. It can help a child pass through the 9-year change, and we'll talk a little bit about that in this interpretation, and also help people deal with guilt in there as they are experiencing their life, as well as suffering. So it can be a useful story on many levels because of the fact that it kind of encapsulates what it means to be a human being. So let's start. First, in the beginning of the story, the young girl, we get a depiction of her family life. She's just alone with her father. She is very sweet, beautiful, and good and innocent. And she has a friend that's quite narcissistic and selfish. Of course, this is depicting the very first stage of development before age 7, when children have this grandiose image of themselves of being like kings, queens. They have an image of goodness and virtue about them, but at the same time they have this narcissistic, selfish side of them that they're unaware of, and they're actually quite fond of them. That changes when they turn 8 years old. At 8, they begin to develop a sense for their dualistic nature. And they start to sense, well, what part of me is animal? What part of me is human? And they start to even maybe play out these scenarios in play of acting like an animal, or comparing their house to animal houses, what they might mean. And of course, this should be encouraged. This is a very healthy play for children to be engaged in, because it's the way they pass through this developmental stage of being cognizant of their dual nature. And it's an important stage to pass through before they get to their 9-year change, which I'll talk about in just a minute. So in the story, this is depicted more elaborately when we get to the father remarrying the mother of this awful little friend she has that's narcissistic and selfish. And to their shock and to their astonishment, they find out that why the stepmother and the stepsister, her friend, or her other side to her, is quite resentful and envious on a very deep level. So much so that they want to just get rid of this good and beautiful little girl. They want to ban her from the house and no longer give her baths and milk and give her drinks of water. And so the mother gives her a paper-thin dress, sends her out into the dead of winter to try to find strawberries, which they knew she wouldn't be able to find, and that she would ultimately die out there. Well, while she's out there with this paper-thin dress that the wind can pass through, why, she runs into a little home. She comes inside into its warmth and comfort, and there are three little men there. So I want to stop there for a minute, because that is the transition from this awareness of the dualistic part of our being. What part of us is an animal, what part of us are human, and going into the 9-year change. The 9-year change is, up until then, is really about just assimilating the outside environment. The child has really been concentrating on forming and building their body, their outer frame, but they have yet to come in the doorway to see what's happening inside. So here is that transition from just being aware of our outer identity, if you will, and then becoming opening our eyes to this inner chamber. It's very similar to Adam and Eve. If you're familiar with the biblical story of Adam being thrown out of this beautiful Garden of Eden, and then having to deal with in loneliness, this suffering and dreary world that we must pass through. And in that dreary world, their eyes are open. They're able to see their conscience of what is good and what is evil. That's what's happening here. The girl is being awakened to her conscience. So as she goes out into this winter land of cold and destitute, alone, which actually the 9-year child really feels this loneliness in them, because they feel separated from the world, they feel separated from their childhood, and now they're alone. They're just going into this world of suffering. And while they're there in this paper-thin dress, and I want to emphasize that paper-thin dress because going inside oneself is really a spiritual activity, becoming awakening to that. The paper dress that the wind can even pass through is very symbolic of our spirit bodies. The girl is not going out into the winter land as a physical being. She's going there as a spirit. And she goes into this little house, into the warmth and comfort of these three little men. That's going into her own inner chambers of her heart. She's becoming conscious of her conscience, if you will. So these three little men that she discovers are real. There's something that really are inside the girl itself, or herself. It's not some magical beings like Disneyland wants to portray, but they represent something in reality to a child of 9. In fact, when you tell this story to that child, they may have some misgivings about these three little men, because it represents these little men put boundaries and restrictions on their childhood, I guess, freedom, and they're like the birds of the air. They are leaving the land of, or their life of being bathed in milk and being able to drink wine, and now having to enter this realm of responsibility of having these spiritual boundaries and of kindness and of and willingness to help and serve. So this is the kind of the boundaries that these little men put, and sometimes children feel themselves, they sense this within them as you're telling this story. So, and that's a good thing. That's what you want them to kind of be aware, come to an awareness of. So, these three little men, why are they just three? Why aren't they two or four? The number three is an important number. It always has been throughout all of ancient days. And of course, all the numbers up till 9, each one of them carry a real quality about them. But this particular number, which we see repeated throughout the fairy tales, is symbolic of a spiritual power. And to the Grimms, who were Christian, have a background in Christianity, it meant the Trinity, or the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, the power that they render to individuals. But, it doesn't necessarily have to be viewed, in fact, in that way. It is essentially a power, a real force within us that is has transformational change. It can bring about transformational change in our lives. So these three little men, because they are divinity in a sense, can sense and can actually discern the real nature of this girl's heart, because they can see her spirit, and they discern that it is good, that it is beautiful. And so they bestow upon her a number of different gifts. And the first gift that they bestow upon her is their own home of warmth and comfort. And then they give her the gift of the strawberries that she's able to gather and return to her own home of milk and wine to save her from death. And then finally we have the three other gifts that represent the endowment of an inherited power. So to the Grimms, the comfort of the home and the fire was representative of the Comforter, or the Holy Ghost, that affirms all truth. The strawberries were representing of the sun, or the blood of Christ, the redness in color with the white purity that it brought of the snow. And finally, the three additional gifts of power that we inherit from the Father. And that's what the story focuses on, are those three gifts. And that's what I would like to just go into a little bit of detail on, these three gifts that we are inherited from our Father that gives us this spiritual power. We already inherit them. They're already part of us. And that's exactly why there needs to be 3 elves and not 2 or 4. So the first of these endowment gifts comes from the second elf, which is, he says that, well, I'm going to make her, whenever she speaks, a gold coin will come from her mouth. So what's going on there? What's the symbolism? The symbolism is that he's bestowing her a sense of truth. It's when our actions and our words are in harmony with that inner conscious. The 3 little men, why they turn to gold. They have this real quality of conviction. They're no longer just opinions or convention regurgitated from art, if you will, or memorized, but they are actual testimony or witness of the truth, because they come from a living experience of it, of coming in and being aware of their conscience and following it. That is the blessing of having this sense of truth. It really gives someone a sense of being and security about who they are as an individual. It's really finding, when we say we want to find out who we are, that's really what we're trying to find, is that sense of truth and reality. It's when, though, that we ignore that that conscience, that we lose that sense. And the reason is because, well, you can think of it like this, is light is kind of immaterial, and it needs element in order to be seen and discerned. But if we become if the element becomes so dominant in our perception and self-evident to us that we forget or we reject the light that actually the element is formed from, why then our outer sense of being has to come from outside of ourselves. It can't come from that inner place where those three little men are. It comes from recognition, from awards, from our certifications, from our titles, and from flattery or whatever. But it comes from something outside of us. And that's a very dangerous thing, because we lose the uncertainty of truth. We lose the certainty of that we even exist. Say nothing of everything else. So it's important as a human being to possess this sense of truthfulness within us. Without it, we can lose our sense of being and our confidence. The next, so having the sense of truth, though, isn't enough, because it is like being someone that's old, that's looking at their childhood, the past, and reminiscing and saying, oh, those were the good old days, but it's not like this now. It's not like this in the present. That was for the pre-mortal world. Those truths don't exist here in reality. And so it's not enough to sense what truth is. It can actually bring a great deal of sorrow into our lives and suffering if we're aware of truth, but then we are not surrounded by it. So that's where the second gift is important by the first elf. And the first elf says, I will make her so she grows more and more beautiful every day. Beauty is manufactured. It is something that comes out of the work of our hands. And it's very important because it links us and gives meaning to the physical world around us. It links it to those spiritual truths that we sense. And so it allows us to sort of have some consolation about our present existence, that even though we are from the past, was so beautiful and true, we can create that, a little space here on earth that has a resemblance of truth. And we can't underestimate the value of the arts, whether that be in songs or in the flute playing, or whether that be in painting or in sculpture, or in poetry and in writing, and in our traditions, dances, and the word, spoken word, from the pulpit and so forth. Those are all really important conventions that we have in order to link us to the past, to keep us in remembrance of those truths, without which we would lose that tenuous connection we have to truth. And that's really why the three little elves are little, and their home is little, because they are small and they have soft voice compared to what's outside, which is the suffering of the world and the snow and all the material things bombard us, um, you know, with our common senses. And so, we can just lose that connection to the light very quickly. It's very tenuous and fragile, but this artistic world that we create can help solidify it here, or in the context of an earthly existence. Without that, we would lose our enthusiasm, our hope for a better world. But the artistic world is not enough to complete the human being, because the artistic beauty that we create here cannot be carried through the portal of death. It's artificial. An artifact is artificial. And therefore it is just a representation of truth. It's not reality. And so that is, it just can't be carried with us into the afterworld. And if you don't believe me, look at the tombs of the pharaohs for yourself, and you will find that none of the artifacts actually went with them. So that's why this next gift is also essential. We couldn't just have two gifts. We had to have this third gift. This third gift gives us something that we can carry beyond this world. And it was really the purpose of life in general, to obtain. This gift, the elf says, or he assures the girl that she's going to get married. Not just to anybody, but to a king. She will become a queen with a much broader responsibility for an entire community and kingdom. So this gift is the gift to extend ourselves beyond our inner life, but to take that inner life and move it into the broader community, or into individuals like our partner, that we can have a real connection with that individual. We can know who they are. We can sense their needs. And that's really the core of the power that's given to us here. It is the core of it is to be able to sympathize with someone else's suffering, to be able to connect with that person and feel their pain, if you will, so that we can serve them and help them in a greater capacity. It's to lift others in their needs. It's to raise a child. When we were demanding that milk and that wine, and now we provide that for our own children, for the next generation, if you will. So this power is really the power of love. This is what I'm talking about. And it only can come from a divine source within us. Otherwise, we're doing it out of convention, or because we want to receive recognition, or something of that nature. We have to be acting with goodness for the sake of goodness. Otherwise, it doesn't carry with us. We act, we have this enthusiasm or this joyfulness about us when we're serving. Now, so that's really the only gift of the three that can be carried through the portal of death. And that's why there needs to be three gifts and not two or four or so forth, because three is what's needed. And those are the gifts that are, we come here to this earth to receive. We can't receive the gift of truth without a body, and we can't obtain enthusiasm if we don't develop the arts within us. And finally, we can't develop this love without having it being bestowed upon us by the spirit world, by coming into this world of spirit and having it endowed upon us. So the girl receives these gifts, and she goes back to her home where she was bathed in milk and given wine to drink. And while she gets there, her other side of herself, her stepsister, becomes even more envious and more resentful, and she wants to go and get those gifts for herself. And, she goes to the little house, and the elves discern that no, she doesn't have the same qualities as the previous little girl that came. And they end up actually cursing her in the opposite way. So what this teaches us is that we can't fool the conscience. We can't fool the divine source within us. We can't trick it into giving us these gifts. We can't obtain them in any other way but by carefully monitoring our speech and our deeds, that they are actually in alignment with those three little men. And if we are in alignment, then we get the gifts and the blessings from those. We are blessed with more truth, blessed with more beauty in our lives, and we're blessed with divine transformational powers of goodness. If this, if we go in it in any other way, we're going to be rejected. And in some ways, it can even, if we go against what those three little men say, then we're going to get another gifts, which are really guilt and shame, humility, or not humility, but humiliation, and pride and hypocrisy. Those are the results of going down the other path of not following what those three little men talk about. So we can't, have our cake and eat it too. We have to have one or the other. So, as the last little elf claimed in the story later on, she does indeed marry a king, and she becomes a queen herself, in reality, over a vast kingdom, and the people love her. She has a child. She's about to baptize him, but during this whole thing of And in the height of her glory, she begins to be disturbed by her past. And the stepmother and stepsister come to pretend to congratulate her. And that's kind of symbolic of this idea that, sometimes think that the passage of time or the passage of um, or that our successes and our titles and acknowledgments and so forth can somehow erase this other side to us, our conscience. We can erase the guilt, and those it can't erase it. It's always there, and in fact, as sometimes at the height of our glory, then it can just throw us out the window like it did in this story, and she falls into the river, completely immersing her body until she drowns. The irony of that is that she's getting her baby ready to be baptized, and instead she is baptized herself in the river. So that's symbolic of just sort of dying spiritually and physically. But it doesn't last long, because she rises up reformed as this duck. And ducks anciently have taken on various meanings. Even modern China still takes the duck as a symbol of love and good prosperity. But it also can mean transformational change, presumably because of the plumage, the radical plumage change that takes place in the wintertime or the summer. And then also ducks are symbolic of the dead visiting one, and your ancestors coming to visit, because in the winter or the summer, when the ducks come on their migratory patterns, it's almost as if they're coming from a different spirit land. And in this story, those meanings fit well, because she is transformed, and her spirit tells the king to take his sword and put it over her head 3 times. 3 again, representing the 3 little men, or the power of this spiritual transformational force. He does so, and she quickly transforms back into her body again, only this time all pure and clean from her conscience. The king condemns her conscience, which are the stepmother and the stepsister, puts them in a studded barrel, rolls them into the river, where they are dead and never return, and they can live peacefully. So that is the my translation, or I should not translation, but interpretation of the story. And I guess I can encapsulate it. So the first reason we might tell this story is to actually teach the number 3, because it really does give this meaning, and it's good to teach the dualistic nature of man in this story. It really comes out strongly as well for that 8-year-old child. But it also can be taught to the 9-year-old who is awakening to that inner life, that inner conscience, and how to deal with it. It's understanding what the role of that conscience really is. It's not just to condemn and to judge and to make one guilty over the things and the mistakes one's made. But more importantly, the conscience has the opposite effect. And those feelings are even stronger, that blesses us with these three ennobling gifts of truth, of beauty, and of love. And finally, it can help people overcome their guilt and move on with their lives, having this feeling of redemption within them. I hope you were able to get something from this story. I was glad to share it with you. I always like to share these stories with you and their meanings, and I hope it's useful. I hope you share them with others. Thank you.